In Queensland, Australia, lorikeets and honeyeaters feed on garden blossoms. Koala numbers have improved after 70 years of legal protection. But the human population of Queensland, both residents and visitors, is increasing dramatically and putting pressure on the natural environment, just as it's recovering from the first wave of human colonisation more than a century ago. Queensland lies in the northeastern corner of Australia. Half the state is within the Tropic of Capricorn. Brisbane in the south has a climate often considered near perfect. The first settlements in the hills behind Brisbane were agricultural. This rolling countryside, similar to rural England, was covered in dense forests just over a century ago. But the forests were cleared to provide grazing areas for cattle and later for growing crops. Fruit growing is a commercial enterprise in this subtropical environment. This pineapple plantation is a good example. Growing tropical fruits like pineapples, pawpaws and bananas has become an important industry, but damage to the environment occurred much earlier. The scars of development have now largely healed. Wallabies and grey kangaroos adapted to the changes and are probably more numerous now than they were before. The merino sheep's superb wool used to be Australia's most important export product. Although that's no longer true, with industrial expansion and the growth of mining, the sheep still play an important role. Queensland drovers, with their lonely life, became folk heroes, the subject of songs and stories. Men who could take a flock of sheep hundreds of kilometres in search of pasture or a market. Today, most stock travels by truck, but the occasional drover is still to be found, working his flock across country just as his great-grandfather might have done. The sheep and cattlemen, following the old traditions, lived on ranches inland that their fathers and grandfathers built. Now people are drawn to the coast, Queensland's miles of silver coral beaches. Years ago, this coast was deserted, home only to birds, crabs and seashells. The only sound was the waves and the wind in the mangrove trees. Now it's a leisure playground where people from the city come to wash off the dust and soak up the sun. Some of the birds tolerate this intrusion. It's a long coast and there are other places to go, but the Australian pelicans continue to use the same fishing grounds, even though they no longer have them to themselves. The majority of people enjoy watching them, not just bird watchers. They are big, impressive birds. Cooperative drives have evolved as part of the Australian pelican's fishing behaviour, and sometimes a flock will surround a shoal of fish in shallow water, confining them, while the birds dip their bills below water to catch them. At other times, fishing is more solitary, the bird flying in the air looking for food in the water below. It uses its huge throat pouch rather like a fishing net with great skill. As the water drains out and the fish slips into the pelican's crop, the bird is already looking for the next one. The boats and people haven't affected the bird's fishing, but when it's time to breed, some species which tolerate human presence at other times are very sensitive to human disturbance. In this situation, some species simply fail to breed altogether. The black-necked stork is one example. But in the mangrove creeks frequented by humans, it will still hunt for the small fish which make up its diet. The Australian white ibis, too, finds enough food at the coast, but for breeding, both stork and ibis have to fly hundreds of kilometers to secluded inland lakes. Egrets in the shallows, yellow-billed spoonbills feeding in the mud, the Queensland coast has a diverse range of water birds. Each one is adapted to exploit a niche along the rich and muddy shoreline. Black swans occur all over Australia, where there are large expanses of open water with sufficient aquatic vegetation for them to feed on. There's no shortage of birds on the Queensland coast, either in number or variety. The black-winged stilt is common all over Australia too. Wherever there are wet, muddy places, there are stilts feeding. The sea and sunshine draw human visitors as well. Birds aren't the only ones who like to dig in the mud. Queensland's beaches, like most tropical shores, are alive with burrowing crabs. Soldier crabs are quite small and have a pale blue carapace. Along the shoreline, they're the staple food supply for the water birds. They disappear underground if approached and resurface when the danger has passed. Local anglers find them a convenient source of bait. At low tide, the soldier crabs come out in huge numbers, scurrying up and down the beach in search of food. They sift minute algae from between the mud particles on the surface, feeding and moving on constantly. The beach is riddled with their holes. On the fringes of the group, some stop to take shelter. They appear to be using existing holes, but normally they make a fresh hole each time they stop, plugging it closed as the tide comes in. The crab's feeding expeditions provide an ideal opportunity for the birds to catch them. A soldier crab is almost impossible to catch if it can reach a soft patch to burrow into, but in the open, it's much more vulnerable. The white-faced egret selects only crabs of a certain size. Catching very small crabs is a waste of time for a large bird, but if they're too big, they're awkward to swallow. The black-winged stilt chooses small crabs and carefully washes them. There's a risk of losing the crab this way, dropping it into the water and picking it up again. The gull-billed tern takes no chances. Far eastern curlews come to Queensland from their breeding grounds in eastern Russia, an amazing trans-equatorial migration, a round trip of over 16,000 kilometres. Unlike the heron, it doesn't have to see its prey. It can feel for the crabs beneath the surface. Most Australian kingfishers live away from the shore, in forests inland. The sacred kingfisher is adaptable. Although it's really a forest bird, in the coastal parts of its range, it comes to the shore to take advantage of the abundant crabs. The sacred kingfisher's native forests, or what's left of them after over a century of tree felling, offer some indication of what might happen on the shore. Queenslanders used to be notorious for their attitude to wildlife. If it moves, shoot it. That may have been true once, but now attitudes are changing. The first bird to call at dawn, the laughing kookaburra, is known as the bushman's alarm clock. The kookaburra's nest is in a hollowed-out termite mound high up in a gum tree. With a nest of hungry chicks to feed, the adult has to start hunting for food early in the morning. The kookaburra is a giant kingfisher, 45 centimetres from beak to tail. It catches lizards, large insects, and even small mammals on the forest floor to feed its young. Australia has an enormous variety of snakes, most of them poisonous. But to a kookaburra, they are simply another food source. The loss of part of the forest hasn't greatly affected the kookaburra population. The black and white fantail, or willy wagtail, is a small bird which is fiercely defensive of its nesting territory. The much larger kookaburra is too close to its nest, and the wagtail makes every effort to drive it away. Unfortunately, it seems to have little effect, and so the wagtail resumes its nest building. Birds which must have holes to nest in need old trees, and in some places these are now much harder to find. Young dollar birds in a branch with several connecting holes wait impatiently to be fed. These birds were filmed in one cluster of trees. 3 different species were nesting immediately over a road where vehicles were passing at frequent intervals. They have all accepted the changed environment. If the inevitable disturbance is gradual and enough habitat is left afterwards, perhaps the shorebirds too can adapt to the changes taking place. Tree-nesting birds can move to another site if their habitat is disturbed far more easily than most other wildlife. It is not so easy for small mammals which are earthbound and relatively slow-moving. But one has adapted very successfully to the proximity of man. This young brush-tailed possum making an early excursion left the pouch prematurely and is still too young to be out climbing the branches. It looks very precarious, and it will be some time before it is as sure-footed as its mother. But it does have one great asset, a prehensile tail. The baby possum is not happy away from its mother, which comes to rescue it. Like many of Australia's native mammals, the possum is a marsupial. The young normally spend their early life in their mother's pouch, where there's shelter and food for the baby. Although the possum is a tree-dwelling animal, it is one of the most adaptable marsupials, and consequently one of the most successful, especially around inhabited areas where it now lives in the roofs of houses. The echidna, or spiny anteater, although very adaptable, remains in the country, largely because its food supply is more abundant in forests and farmland. The Queensland countryside has many species of ants, among them the meat ants, known for the ferocity of their bite. Meat ants nourish the females in their nests in springtime, and the echidnas seek out meat and nests at this time of year to feed on the plump females. Once its soft parts are underground, it is protected from further ant bites by its densely packed spines. Queensland farmers always keep on the move around their paddocks. Stand still for too long in the wrong place and the ants will attack. Conservation of Queensland's wildlife started in earnest with the koala. Until 70 years ago, koalas were shot for their fur. When it became illegal to kill them, the koala population began to recover. Although in some rural parts of Queensland, koalas are quite common, over a great deal of their once extensive range, they've disappeared, and many Australians have never seen a wild one. Although they are protected, the koalas face other problems. Disease decimated some koala populations in the 1880s and again in the 1930s. Research has found that the koalas often suffer from a chlamydia infection which affects them in several ways. Although there may be many animals in a population with the infection, they often have no outward sign of disease. The infection can cause conjunctivitis and pneumonia, but its main impact is to reduce their fertility. Over the past 5 or 10 years, this caused great alarm, and it was claimed that the chlamydia infection would bring about the extinction of koalas by the end of this century. Research indicates that mothers may pass on the infection to their offspring, as a young koala stays with its mother for 6 months after leaving the pouch. It may be passed from one sex to the other during mating. One thing which is certain is that the infection occurs in koalas across most of their range in a small percentage of animals. Stress is created by their increasingly urbanized environment, from disturbance by vehicles and domestic dogs. This seems to lower their resistance to infection. This young koala, clinging firmly to its mother's fur in a gum tree, is more fortunate, since it's living in a stable environment. Koalas like to vary their diet within the eucalyptus family, climbing down from one gum tree to reach another of a different flavor. They travel surprisingly long distances across country in this way. For the koalas to survive, there is a need to conserve large areas of eucalyptus forests and habitat corridors for the young to disperse through. The wildlife of Queensland's interior survived the first wave of human invasion, but now its coastal wildlife is experiencing similar problems. As man's leisure activities expand here, pressures increase on the natural environment. The authorities and residents have to find a way to balance human needs with those of the wildlife if Queensland's coast is to remain a secure environment for its wild creatures. Beside the rivers in Nepal, there grows a strange and beautiful tree. Scientists call it bombax, silk cotton. Travellers by sea knew it as the producer of the stuffing of old-style life jackets, the kapok tree. It grows all around the tropics, and everywhere it's a life preserver for a wide variety of animals. When the river floods, the danger for the trees on the bank is serious. But when fire strikes, strangely enough, it's the means of survival for the life preserver. The fires may be caused naturally by lightning, or they may be set deliberately by local cattle owners. In both cases, the effect is to burn off the old grass and allow the new shoots to spring up. If the grass is allowed to establish itself, it forms a dense mat covering the ground, which will prevent the kapok seedlings from taking root. Other inhabitants of the riverbank find the fire an advantage too, like drongos. Drongos are flycatchers, common in tropical Africa as well as in the Indian subcontinent. They gather round the blaze to feed on insects driven out of the grass by the heat. The kapok tree is fire resistant with its thick spongy bark, but grass fires are a major cause of death to tortoises and other ground-living animals. If the fire burns too fiercely and too long, even some of the kapok trees will die. In the south of Nepal, the trees grow along the banks of the rivers on the fertile soil of the floodplain. They form what's called riverine forest, a typical Nepalese habitat. Nepal's northern boundary is high in the Himalayas, but in the south, the country is flat and low-lying. Royal Chitwan National Park is a preserved area of grassland and jungle. Where the Narayani River winds through the park, it is bordered by a forest of kapok trees. The trees produce their flowers in January, when the river is placid during the dry season. Each flower is the size of a coffee cup, with a large supply of sweet nectar, and the trees produce them by the thousand. Insects are few at this time of year. It's winter, and the nectar attracts few bees, but plenty of other animals. These are grey langurs. The langurs eat the flowers and buds too, and their effect on the trees is mostly destructive. Kapok flowers are a rich and valuable source of food for the monkeys at this time of year. People's attitudes to animals often differ. To outsiders, the grey-bearded monkeys are attractive, even beautiful to watch. But to the Nepalese, they're sacred. That's why they tolerate the langurs' aerial raids on valuable fruit trees, as well as on kapok. Langurs live in sociable family groups, scouring the forest for their food. Because they move on after a day or so, they don't completely destroy the tree's flower production for the season. The rhesus macaque uses the kapok trees too. It's not so destructive as the langurs, seldom actually eating the flowers, but more often just drinking the sugary nectar. In doing so, the macaques pollinate the flowers. The kapok trees must be one of the few plants regularly pollinated by mammals other than bats. Another active pollinator is the five-striped palm squirrel. The big, juicy flowers stay on the trees for about 3 weeks until they've attracted something to pollinate them. Then the nectar supply will dry up and the flowers will begin to die. All this time, there are no leaves on the tree, so that the flowers shine out like beacons across the forest. They also attract birds, a black-headed oriole and a yellow-naped woodpecker. The birds play their part in pollinating the kapok flowers too, carrying the pollen from one to another as they make their rounds in search of nectar. A lineated barbet. The name barbet means bearded. It refers to the bristles round the bird's bill, which act as very efficient carriers of pollen. Like the kapok tree itself, the barbets are widespread all round the tropics. So too are bulbuls in Africa and here in the Indian subcontinent. This is the red-whiskered bulbul. The rose-ringed parakeet and the jungle myna appear to be fairly amicable at this time of year, but later on they will become rivals as they compete for nesting places in these very trees. While the flowers are out, the birds make the most of them. They need to gather as much nectar as they can whilst it's there, because in February and early March, the flowers will begin to fall as the tree enters the next phase of its annual cycle. The dropping of the flowers indicates that the fruits are beginning to develop. The fallen blossoms provide a bonus for spotted and hog deer in the grassland below the trees. By March, the trees that were scorched by fires earlier in the year are showing signs of recovery from their ordeal. March is the time of growing leaves, and even apparently dead trees respond with renewed vitality as the sap rises. The leaves often spring straight from the blackened trunk, as well as growing in the more usual position on the branches. By April, the trees are spreading their canopies to the sun, building up the energy supplies depleted by the flowering season. The fruits are developing too, and soon the kapok, the silk cotton, is blowing in the wind. The trees present a wonderful sight at this stage, covered with snowballs in the sunshine. The kapok itself has an important function as a means of dispersing the seeds. This steady snowfall in May is a memorable sight for travellers to South Nepal, taking place under the clear blue skies of the dry season, the Nepalese spring. Each clump of silk cotton contains a seed, to spread the kapok trees across the riverine area. The local people gather up the kapok to fill warm linings for jackets or quilted coverlets for cool nights. At one time, the kapok was commercially valuable as an export crop for insulation and for making life jackets, but now it has been replaced by synthetics. The villagers have used it for centuries, patiently teasing out the hard seeds from their silky parachutes. The village women discard the seeds, but to some other local residents, the seeds are the best part of the tree. They're stainer bugs, brightly coloured but quite harmless, and they time their breeding season to coincide with the kapok blizzards. Mating pairs crawl all over the snowdrifts, the females dragging the males about in search of a good place to lay their eggs. The eggs hatch into tiny red bugs, which feed on the kapok seeds. Some seeds survive all this to germinate. They're only just in time. June marks the start of the monsoon rains. In the riverine areas of southern Nepal, the monsoon is a time of change. Not only the plant and animal life, but the very geography of the area will be affected. The power of the flooded river is a force to be reckoned with. For the people who live here, the monsoon floods can be a time of great hardship as they try to travel across the level plain. The rivers change their courses, tearing at their banks. They also take their toll of the kapok trees too. The wet weather brings a bonus for the jungle miners. As the water floods ants' nests underground, birds make a meal of the homeless insects. The monsoon season lasts 4 months, from June to September. For humans and animals alike, it's a time of damp discomfort. But without it, the forest wouldn't be here. The wet season brings a flush of growth to the flat land along the river banks. Orchids blossom in great profusion, drawing their nourishment either from within the trees or from the sodden moss on their branches. When the rains end in September, the riverbanks are littered with bleaching trunks, the corpses of drowned trees. Among the kapok trees which still stand, a safe distance from the river, lives a strange creature called a vine snake. Its curiously shaped head gives it accurate forward vision along grooves in its nose, and its slender, lightweight body moves easily amongst the thinnest branches. Its prey consists of small birds, especially tree-living species like the bush chat. Adults can usually fly before the snake reaches them. Most of its victims are young birds, which are still learning to fly. Nesting places are provided by holes in the kapok tree's soft trunk. The spongy wood is easy to dig into, and several of Nepal's forest birds take advantage of it. The rose-ringed parakeet is one of them. But although the parakeet can enlarge an existing hole, it can't dig one from scratch. Only woodpeckers can do that. Most of the forest birds live in second-hand holes, and the competition for them is intense. A barred owlet is among the birds which nest in woodpecker holes. Miners will invade other birds' nests to steal the eggs or to eat the young birds, and often to take the site over for themselves. Other species are very wary of them. Jungle miners with chicks to feed are extremely defensive of the nest hole which they've taken over. Among the other hole nesters is the Indian roller, a large and very handsome species of insect eater. The roller will eat small birds as well, especially if it finds them in an unguarded hole suitable for its own family. All the birds that nest in the kapok tree have to guard their holes from dawn to dusk. Such is the pressure of competition. The birds that made most of the holes, the woodpeckers, come under frequent attack. While one parent is out gathering food, the other stays behind to guard the nest. Nepal has over 20 different species of woodpecker living in its forests. This is the fulvous-breasted pied woodpecker. It too has to watch out for jungle miners in search of nesting spaces. Emerging to fetch more food is never safe, and the woodpecker always waits until its mate is standing by to take over guard duty. Even a rose-ringed parakeet will make a brief challenge. These parakeets spend a lot of their time courting and preening each other. The branches of the kapok tree support colonies of bio-weavers, birds which build their nests during the monsoon so that their young can feed well on the flush of insects immediately afterwards. The males alone do the building, meticulously weaving strands of grass together to make a sturdy coconut-shaped nest. It's a process similar to sewing, as they poke the ends in and then pull them through to the other side. Not all the material is fresh. Males frequently steal from neighbouring nests. When the nest is complete, the proud owner advertises it with a fluttering display intended to attract females. By September, when the kapok trees are in full leaf, they once more attract parties of grey langurs, this time to feed on the leaves and on the buds of next winter's flowers. The langurs demonstrate the value of the kapok trees to so many of Nepal's forest creatures. They share the wealth of food too. When they accidentally drop bunches of leaves to the ground, less agile creatures can eat them. As the langurs carry on their social activities high in the kapok trees, the season wears on towards midwinter and the blooming of a new generation of flowers. For all the animals that live in them, the trees provide an important source of food and shelter in their leaves, fruits and seeds, and in the flowers themselves. The leaves die off as December approaches to make way for the blossom. As the flowers open, exposing their nectar to the animals, their red and orange petals seem to reflect the fire that is essential to the tree's continuing dominance of the riverside forest. Whether it's called kapok, silk cotton, or its formal name of bombax, this tree is a life preserver, a vital part of the ecology of the riverbanks of southern Nepal.